to the tree where they strung up a man. They say murder three. Strange things that happen here. How stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?
Coffee. Without it, we would never have had the Industrial Revolution. We'd all be still living in Europe in mud huts. Here in Laredo, we have the Organic Man Coffee Trike. 4501 McPherson, the best coffee on the planet. If you can't get to Laredo, you can order from the Organic Man Coffee Trike.shop. And welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. Tonight, I'll be talking about the Tatzelwurm. Halloween is only 3.5 months away. Time to start stocking up on treats. October 9th, which is a Saturday, I'll be at the Phoenix Bookstore, 1602 Victoria Street here in Laredo, Texas. I'll be talking about my latest book, Paranormal Laredo. You can get a signed copy or just enjoy a night of me talking about some true and bizarre things seen around our area. If you have a story you'd like to hear on the show or you'd like to see in my next book, this would be a good time to get a hold of me and give me the details. October is coming up fast, so keep it in mind. Maybe mark your calendar. I'll probably be there from around 4 p.m. until closing time at 7. Come by, have a cup of coffee, maybe buy some books. They make great Christmas presents, and why wait till the last minute? You can wrap a book, hide it away on a shelf somewhere, and a year later, when you pull it down, it'll still be good as long as some rat doesn't eat it. Tonight's show was suggested by Roddy Fry. It sounds as if Roswell is sending out messages to other cats during the show, as she's been communicating with his cats. He told me every time Roswell hollered in the background, his cats would run around looking for the intruder, or maybe she was telling them something to do. I'd never heard of this bizarre creature until Roddy sent me the email. There are tons of websites telling about Tatzelwurms, but most only tell a few small details. Many of them go by the assumption that the creature is just a myth. More of that creepypasta nonsense. There is one company that anytime you enter a search, their pages pop up. They now want to control everything anyone reads on every subject. A lot of what they tell us is wrong, but so many people turn to them for information, research is getting a lot harder to do. It has gotten to a point anytime I see their suffix on a page, I just skip over it and look for pages that don't associate with them. No one entity should be allowed to control what we know or read, but they seem to think that they should. Tatzelwurms are creatures of the Alps. Because the Alps crisscross so many countries, you may also know these strange cryptids by different names like the lindworm, arasis, dazelworm. A tatzelworm, also known as clawworms, are a strange mixture of two creatures, half cat, half snake. It makes its home in the mountains and it preys on animals and sometimes humans. The name worm is wrong in that the creature may be a snake or a dragon hybrid, kind of like that movie, Lair of the White Worm. Peter Capaldi was in it long before his Doctor Who fame. I would not recommend allowing the youngins to watch this movie. It's definitely not a kid's show. The word Tatzelwurm is German for worm with paws. Paws as in little hands, not as in a long stop. Has become the most popular name for the animal in English. Other German derived names include Stallerworm or Stahlworm, which means tunnel worm. Bergstutzen, a German for mountain stump, which I couldn't understand why anyone would call a weird creature a stump, unless they were stumped by the appearance of the creature. A springworm, which means a jumping worm. By having so many names to choose from, it makes it hard to track down some of the stories. According to witnesses and alpine folklorists, tasselworms typically about 2 feet at the shortest and about 6 feet long at the largest. Some reports said that they could get up to 8 feet depending on whose website you looked at. Things get weird seeing as the creature has a head of a cat in the body of a snake. The witnesses have said it had 2 legs, but sometimes it had 4, along with a long, thin body. The front legs have claws just like those of a cat, long, thin hooked weapons used to grab or slice. The head and upper torso are covered in either fur or something that kind of looks like fur. The back half is covered in scales like a snake in either greenish brown or black. Their bodies are described with smooth fur, skin, or scales. Some reports say they're brown or white in color with a lighter belly. I already know snakes don't have scales, they have skin. Fish have scales. When you scale a fish, you wind up with a whole bunch of little flakes that protect the fish. A snake has one continuous skin that, when shedded, comes out in one long tube, kind of like a sausage skin. Some of the descriptions say the creature has scales like a dragon. Once more, it comes down to which description you're looking at. Some dragons have skin, while others have scales. The eyes look very much cat-like, narrowing down while in bright light and dilating to see better at night. The head has ears like those of any cat. To make matters worse, if you encounter the Tatzelwurm, it can spray poisonous fumes from its mouth, and its saliva is known to burn if you get it on your skin. One of the first stories on the Tatzelwurm-like creature is that of Heinrich von Winkelried, a convicted criminal who was squared off against the dragon-like serpent that was in the midst of terrorizing the village of Unterwalden on Mount Pilatus during the 14th century. Van Winkelried fought the beast in exchange for his freedom. It was one of those go up against a bloodthirsty dragon or we'll kill you kind of deals. Heinrich was escorted out of town to where the Tatzelwurm was lurking. His guards released him, handed him his sword, and with little choice, the criminal attacked the beast. He managed to overcome the creature and kill it, thus gaining his freedom. In a show of courage and fighting skills, Heinrich raised the sword above his head. Blood from the Tatzelwurm dripped down onto his head, killing him in a very painful manner. This was when folks discovered the blood of the Tatzelwurm was dangerous as well. May 13th, 1572, an ox cart driver said he had killed a small dragon near the city of Bologna. The creature didn't look like anything he'd ever seen before, so the ox cart driver took the specimen into town. The body of the dragon was examined by one of the world's naturalists of the day, who made sketches and then preserved the body and displayed it in a museum for years. Further research indicates that similar creatures have been reported in other parts of Europe before and since the Bologna encounter. Ulisse Androvandi, who lived from 1522 to 1605, is generally recognized as the first person who first formulated the concept of what we now call the study of natural history. Androvandi was born to a wealthy family in Bologna in 1522. The University of Bologna had opened around 1088 and received its first charter from Frederick I in 1158, making it the oldest university in the world. 1553, Androvandi gained a degree from the university in medicine and philosophy, and he began teaching logic and philosophy there in 1554. By 1559, he was appointed professor of philosophy. 1561, he became the first professor of natural science anywhere in the world. Now, a lot of people knew a lot of things about nature, but nobody had ever bothered to study things and then write them down. Folks just thought nature was there to be dealt with and not looked into. In 1640, the university published an illustrated reference to snakes and dragons by Androvani, a Serpentium et Draconium Historia, or The Natural History of Snakes and Dragons. Back in the 16th and 17th century, dragons were considered to be real creatures. Just because people lived centuries ago doesn't mean they were stupid. There were lots of things running around back then that many self-proclaimed intellectuals say didn't really exist. How about the unicorn? Everybody, with the exception of Agnes, and maybe a few other kids, as well as a lot of people who keep their beliefs to themselves to avoid ridicule, well, everybody else knows that unicorns don't exist. Take a look at the original description of the unicorn. In India, they had a creature that was described to the Greeks as having a massive, ungainly body, stumpy legs, and a thick, folded hide that looked like plates of armor. In the middle of its head, there was one huge horn or antler. With the passage of time, this stubby, thick-skinned animal became lithe and looked more like a horse. The spiraled horn was actually a tusk from a narwhal sold to the Europeans by the Vikings, saying it was a unicorn horn. Originally, the unicorn was the Indian rhinoceros. As for Agnes, it was a one-horned goat. In 1642, the university published Androvandi's Monstorum Historia, or the Chronicles of Monsters, which described mythical creatures such as the harpy and the basilisk. In Europe, Bestiaries and Legends, a basilicus is a legendary reptile reputed to be the serpent king who can cause death with a single glance. It's clear that Androvandi was very careful to make a distinction between mythical monsters and real creatures. Even in the natural history of snakes and dragons, where Androvandi describes several types of dragons, he makes it clear that he had not personally seen or examined the creatures himself, and that his information was coming from the accounts of travelers and from earlier writers. Later on in the book, Androvandi tells about one dragon that he was able to study himself. Under the heading Draco Bonanensis, aka the Bologna dragon, Androvandi provides the following description of the killing of a small dragon, the remains of which he was able to personally examine. The dragon was first seen on May 13, 1573, hissing like a snake. He had been hiding on the small estate of Master Petronius near Dosius in a place called Malantalta. At 5 p.m., he was caught on a public highway by a herdsman named Baptista Camaldulius near the hedge of a private farm a mile from the remote city outskirts of Bologna. Baptista was following his ox cart home when he noticed the oxen suddenly came to a stop. He kicked them and shouted at them, but they refused to move and went down on their knees rather than move forward. At this point, the herdsman noticed a hissing sound and was startled to see this strange little dragon ahead of him. Trembling, he struck it in the head with his rod and killed it. Andravandi was given the body of this strange creature, which he examined carefully. It was, he concluded, definitely a reptile, and the first of this type that he had seen. The creature was around 3 feet long, making Andravandi think it was a young example of a much larger creature. The thing he was examining had just 2 legs and appeared to move by slithering like a snake, using the legs to propel itself forward. It had a long, slender neck, and the tail was a thick body. Andravandi preserved the body of the creature, and for some time it became one of the most celebrated exhibits in his theater of natural science. It did not have a head looking anything like a cat. Well, the creature had been killed by being hit on the head. Maybe the blow had so disfigured the thing nobody knew what the head really looked like. The drawings Andravandi made looked more like a snake's head. It could have been just guesswork. Seeing a strange creature while out walking in the mountains, as opposed to seeing it laying on an examination table, might be the answer. Or it might be just a different kind of creature related to the Tatzelwurm. Bologna is only about 60 or 70 miles from the Alps. Andravandi classified this creature as a dragon simply because it didn't seem to fit within any other known existing group of animals. That's why the event on May 13th, 1572, have become sometimes referred to as the last dragon slaying in Europe. The creature described and illustrated in Andravandi's book doesn't have any of the attributes associated with the traditional mythological European dragon, like wings or horns. By categorizing the creature as being a dragon, it led to confusion later on as the much more knowledgeable folks declared the dragon as being just a mythical creature, added to the book by someone who didn't know it didn't exist. They lose sight of the fact that Andravandi had studied the dead body himself, and all the descriptions were of something sitting right in front of him. By the time of his death in 1605, Andravandi said he had amassed a collection of more than 18,000 different natural things, including the remains of the Bologna dragon. These items continued to be displayed in his home until 1617, at which time they were put on public display at the Palazzo Pubblico. The collection was moved to the Institute delle Scienze, you should be able to figure out that translation, in the Palazzo Poggi in 1742. Some of the items remained on display to this day. The building is now the Museo di Palazzo Poggi in Bologna. During the 19th century, items from Andravandi's collection were removed from the museum, and many are now lost. The remains of the Bologna dragon are not part of the current collection in the Palazzo Poggi, and nobody seems to know when they were removed or what happened to them. Either someone wanted to take it home to study it, or some elitist thought we shouldn't have a dead dragon on display to let us know there were things like this walking the earth. I know the name is actually pronounced Bologna, but to me it sounds too much like baloney, so I'll just pronounce it Bologna. You know what they say about bologna. No matter how thin you slice it, it's still bologna. Calling it the Bologna dragon, like I said, sounds too much like calling it the bologna dragon, so, well, that's Italian for you. As for those who say the Bologna dragon was a hoax, they should look at the differences in Androvandi's writings from his books. One is a catalog of things known to be real, and the other was a book on mythical legends. It seems very unlikely that an experienced naturalist like Androvandi could have been taken in by a hoax, as he had plenty of time to examine the dead creature before he wrote about it. Looking at the Fiji mermaid through a glass case, you might be fooled by having one laid out on the table. You'd have to be just a bit dense to not notice it was half fish, half monkey sewn together. Some folks want us to believe the entire thing was just a hoax to make certain people feel foolish. The idea being, Androvandi wanted to show how stupid some of his contemporaries could be. There's no evidence of Androvandi attempting anything of this sort. The creature was displayed in his museum for 30 years before his death. Surely there would have been some hint if it was nothing but a joke. And really, Draco Bonanesis isn't sufficiently outrageous to make sense as a practical joke. If it had wings, a triangular end piece to its tail, or any of the traditional trappings of a dragon, or if, for example, it had been claimed to breathe fire, this might have made sense. But as described and illustrated in Androvandi's book, the creature just isn't sufficiently weird to make anybody look foolish for believing in it. The evidence suggests strongly that Androvandi was puzzled about what this creature was, but that he believed it was a real animal. Plus, you have to ask, when was he going to announce he'd pulled the wool over everyone's eyes? The whole purpose of such a hoax is to see the look on people's faces when they realize you got them. It is also notable, if you take the time to look at the descriptions and drawings of snakes which appear in the same book, that they are accurate, instantly recognizable, and not at all fanciful. Androvandi was a meticulous and methodical observer of the natural world, and there is no reason to suppose that his presentation of Draco Bonanesis is anything but an objective and detailed attempt to describe a completely unknown animal. This must be one of the very few occasions in history when a professor of natural history has had the opportunity to examine the body of an unknown cryptid. At no time did Androvandi say he had a Tatzelwurm. He spoke Italian, not German. The creature didn't have a name yet, so he used the word dragon to describe it. In 1779, there was an historical reputable report of a Tatzelwurm sighting. An Austrian farmer named Hans Fuchs came across two reptilian creatures attacking his livestock. One of the creatures leaped towards Fuchs, who was able to avoid the monster but suffered a heart attack due to the shock. Fuchs was able to live long enough to tell his family about the encounter before dying. The legend of the Tatzelwurm seemed to have become an established fact in the 19th century, despite the evidence of its existence being based on little actual evidence. No matter how many people saw the thing, the boys in the white lab coats wanted a body. The waters were muddied further when one man said he had found the dead body of a Tatzelwurm. The body was apparently eaten along the way by crows, making its identification a little difficult. Or it had been attacked before the man found it, and what was left was kind of beat up looking. 1811, Switzerland, a teacher saw an animal he described as around 5 feet long, with a head like a snake and 2 legs. Although the creature has been seen throughout the Alps in Spain, France, and Germany, most of the sightings are located in Austria and Switzerland. The Tatzelwurm appeared in the Bavarian hunting manual named New Pocket Guide of the Year 1883 for nature, forest, and hunting enthusiasts. It was a little book with a really big name. This enshrined its place in folklore. The guide doesn't tell you how to hunt the creature, only where you'll find it and what it looked like. 1845, southern Germany, two 12-year-old boys saw a reddish-colored creature as long and thick as a man's arm and with a flat head. When describing the creature, fled spitting. When disturbed, the creature was making a spitting sound as it ran away. In 1883, in Austria, a man in an alpine restaurant watched an odd creature resembling a lizard for 20 minutes. He described it as 1.5 feet long, with brown or green scaly skin, and 2 forelegs but no hind legs. 1884, Austria. A 13-year-old boy saw a reddish-brown creature around 2 feet long, with 2 front legs but no hind legs. The creature spit at the boy and ran away. In 1914, northern Italy, a farmer observed an odd animal which was about 30 inches long, 5 inches thick, with a round head and only 2 front legs. 1924, a couple of travelers said they found the skeleton of a Tatzelwurm. They called it a Stahlenwurm due to their being from Switzerland. A veterinary student claimed the skeleton was that of a roe deer, but the finders vigorously disputed that claim, saying the bones had features that could not belong to any deer. The skeleton was being examined by many different scientists with many views on what is real and what is not. At some point, the skeleton went missing. Either it was misplaced by some careless assistant, or it was removed to some unknown location by somebody with an agenda. There are those who say they don't believe something can exist, and so therefore it must vanish if found. In 1927 in Austria, 3 foresters described seeing an unidentified creature which was 50 to 60 inches long, with smooth skin and 2 front legs. The creature was described as hissing and spitting like a cat. Many of the descriptions I went over are lacking the cat's head until the last one, hissing and spitting like a cat. I went back looking for any descriptions of a cat-faced dragon and only began finding them after 1927. Either the Tatzelwurm didn't acquire the cat-like face until then, or people have been seeing a different kind of creature until the cat face showed up. Following this story, the Tatzelwurm began to be described as having a cat's head along with 2 front limbs with claws. It didn't use the forelimbs to move, it moved by slithering like a snake. There's a story of a young girl who was working on a farm in Switzerland, chopping down bean poles, when she accidentally disturbed the burrow of a Tatzelwurm, which attacked her. The young girl described the creature that attacked her as being a gray-colored thing about the size of a common domesticated cat with fleshy, hairless body and only 2 front legs. The creature glared at her with cat-like eyes and then lunged out of its burrow. Seeing something that was beyond her ability to reason, the young girl made a beeline for her house. Once there, she told her folks what she had encountered. The father went out to see if he could find the animal, but it was gone when he arrived at the field. Then there's the story of a man and his son who are out gathering herbs in the mountains when the man suddenly heard his son scream. The boy seemed to be paralyzed in fear, staring at a rock. The man sprinted to his son, only to see a gruesome monster under the rock near his son, which hissed like a snake, had the face of a cat with big, bright eyes. The man managed to stab the Tatzelwurm with a sharpened stick. The wound sprayed blood onto the man's leg, which began to burn. It was so bad he could hardly walk back to their cabin. One experience with the Tatzelwurm comes from a Swiss photographer named Balken back in 1934. While in Meiringen, Switzerland, in the Alps, Balken decided to snap a photograph of a log. While setting up his shot, the log moved. Looking at the image, it looks a bit sketchy, but I wasn't there, so maybe this really is a photograph of a Tatzelwurm. In 1954, another Swiss photographer sparked renewed interest in the Tatzelwurm when he said he had snapped a photo of the elusive creature, prompting a sudden search of the mountains for the thing. In 2000, a strange skeleton was acquired by a local college and then donated along with a large sum of money to the Geneva Institute. Some scientists believe it to be the first legitimate example of the alpine Tatzelwurm. I thought I unplugged that thing. Somebody calling to want to sell me some warranty for my truck. Last time this happened, it was actually somebody I wanted to talk to, and so I had to stop the show and then start it up again. I hate doing that because when you've got those splices in a show, it sounds like something may have been removed or added. It's like when somebody interviews a guest on the show and they'll be talking, and then you can tell by the sound of the recording that something was cut out. It makes me just a little worried. So that's why I try to do the show in one take. Okay, back to the Swiss Tatzelwurm skeleton. The original owner that donated the skeleton never came forward, and the law firm that had handled the transaction, Gunterhausen Limited, refused to divulge any information. For some odd reason, this person had found the skeleton, donated it along with a large sum of money, but he didn't want anybody to know he had done it. Maybe he was embarrassed people would think there was something wrong with him. There are folks like that out there. There are some interesting theories about what the Tatzelwurm is. One theory is that it's a giant salamander. Perhaps long ago a giant salamander roamed the land. This wouldn't be completely unheard of. There's a Japanese giant salamander that can grow up to 5 feet long, has a long, thick body, and front claws. It has back legs, though they're smaller than the front legs. Jeremy Wade got to catch one in Japan. He was looking into stories about the kappa, a Japanese monster that lived in rivers and ate small children. Jeremy was granted permission to work along with a scientist who was studying the giant creature. An interesting thing happened to Wade. He didn't have his dive belt, so in order to get down under the water, he tied a bunch of rocks around his waist with rope. When the scientist and him managed to grab the giant salamander, Jeremy stood up and he felt something grab him in a bad place. He thought the salamander had him by the jewels. It was just one of the rocks had gotten sideways and Well, no damage was done, but for a few seconds there, the look on Wade's face, he looked like the end of the world was upon him. Even if you don't like fishing, Jeremy Wade's book is well worth reading. It tells all the things that happened that never made it on the show, the TV show River Monsters. I don't like to fish, but I love watching Jeremy Wade's shows. This sounds a lot like the creature Balkan and countless others in the Alps had said they'd seen. Perhaps it was a leftover ancient creature that was all but dead when humans began inhabiting the Alps and left only a few specimens. Salamanders do live in cold water, but I don't think the area of the Alps would be a possible home. The Ensatina salamander occasionally makes a hissing sound, while the sirens sometimes produce quiet clicks and can resort to a scream when attacked. That sounds really bizarre, a screaming salamander. That could be the name of a rock group. Bernard Hovelmans, born October 10th, 1916, and living until August 22nd, 2001, was a Belgian-French scientist, explorer, researcher, and a writer best known for the father of cryptozoology. His 1958 book, On the Trek of Unknown Animals, which was originally published in French in 1955, is often regarded as one of the best and influential cryptozoological books. Sorry about that. I was trying not to yawn. Just woke up. In this book, Hovelmans mentions the two earliest written references he found to the Tatzelwurm. The first was in the German Hunting and Nature Guide, New Pocket Guide for Nature, Forest, and Hunting Enthusiasts from 1836. This guide contains a short description of the Tatzelwurm. The creature is treated as a real and possibly dangerous animal, which hunters and walkers may encounter. There is an illustration which Hovelmans said shows a curious picture of a sort of scaly cigar with formidable teeth and wretched little stumpy legs. In the Swiss Almanac for Walking and Climbers, Alpenrosen, published in 1841, there is also a drawing which shows the Tatzelwurm as a long, scaly creature with two tiny front legs. Hovelmans considered that the Tatzelwurm was most probably some unknown form of salamander or possibly something like the Gila monster. The Gila monster is a species of venomous lizard native to the southwestern United States and northwestern Mexico state of Sonora. A heavy, typically slow-moving lizard, up to 2 feet long, the Gila monster is the only venomous lizard native to the United States. Just because the Gila monster is a native to the Americas doesn't mean there can't be some similar creature living in the European mountains. Newspapers in Austria, Switzerland, southern Germany, and northern Italy have carried reports of Tatzelwurm sightings. Often, when being reported or printed, the story will run with the local name, making it hard to search since there are a lot of names for this cryptid. Something like 25 different names for it. The sightings aren't only found in the past. There have been a few sightings of the Tatzelwurm or something like it in recent times. In 2007, in Austria, a 12-year-old boy said he saw a brown, 20-inch long lizard on the banks of the Eins River, near the town of Turnberg. It had a wide head and only 2 front legs. 2009 in Italy, over a period of several years, a number of people in the Valtellina Valley near the Swiss border reported sightings of an agile, bipedal lizard approximately 5 or 6 feet in length. Being bipedal, it must have walked or run on its hind legs, so there must have been at least 4 legs. Since then, there have been other sightings, many of them deemed hoaxes. As stories have persisted, some claiming the Tatzelwurm is capable of leaping 9 feet in the air, others claiming that it squirts green blood when attacked. The desert-dwelling horned lizard will squirt blood from its eyes as a means of defense. As weird as this sounds, it's true. Maybe the Tatzelwurm does the same. Most recently, in 2009, a sighting of the Tatzelwurm-like creature in Treviso, Italy, was chalked up to nothing more than a few escaped monitor lizards. I don't understand why people like having these bizarre exotic animals in their homes, but, well, some people do. I didn't know monitor lizards were popular in Italy. Whenever and wherever the Tatzelwurm has been seen, the reports tend to be disregarded. Kind of like how Bigfoot gets so many encounters, yet science acts as if everybody is either mistaken or crazy. The Tatzelwurm is a creature from European Alps. There have been many sightings, and this so-called clawworm that some people have even been taken to the emergency room with a bite that they report having come from the creature. Now, if the saliva was poisonous, as in some reports, this could be a bad thing. Or maybe the reports of the poisonous saliva weren't all that true. It's very hard to find all of the facts. Some reports say the Tatzelwurm is green and covered with slimy mucus. Many reports where the witnesses attempted to stab the Tatzelwurm say that its blood spewed out on them, burning where it splattered. This is like how when Heinrich von Winkelried had killed the dragon and the blood had killed him. As I was going through all the reports of the Tatzelwurm, I found it being called a dragon, a snake, reptile, or lizard, among all the other names. The creatures are said to be aggressive and can jump 6 to 10 feet. They will hiss when angry. They are venomous, and sometimes so venomous that even their breath is deadly. They also have tough scales that are impervious to most weapons. Tatzelwurms have been known to attack humans and livestock alike, both for food or in self-defense. Believing the creatures to be relatives of the Gila monster, a Mexican beaded lizard, an Australian schoolmaster gave the Tatzelwurm a scientific name, Heloderma europaeanum. Despite this, the creatures are not recognized by the scientific community at large. In German literature, Tatzelwurms are generally portrayed as European dragons. The poem Der Tatzelwurm by Joseph Victor von Scheffel is written from the point of view of a Tatzelwurm. The creature is recounting its days terrorizing the mountainside and lamenting that humans are no longer afraid of it. Additionally, a play called Der Tatzelwurm depicts the eponymous dragon as a small serpent with claws that can grant wishes. Over the last 10 years, people in Treviso, a region of Italy on the Swiss border, have reported sightings of an unusual creature described as an agile, bipedal lizard about 1 meter tall, or 40 inches, nearly 2 meters long, or about 80 inches. Sightings of the Tatzelwurm have become so rare, cryptozoologists believe the creature may be extinct now. In the summer of 2009, a young student of agriculture science spotted the animal. When she told folks about having seen the creature, she was mostly laughed at. Then folks wonder why nobody tells them about seeing these creatures. Now an assistant researcher, she stands by her report. I was not dreaming. I saw it clearly with my own eyes. It approached me, walking on its hind legs. The anterior legs were very small. It resembled a prehistoric velociraptor, and generally it was like a monitor lizard. Yet, while monitor lizards travel on all four legs, this one walked upright. Its back was nearly 80 centimeters, or 30 inches above the ground, with the head nearly a meter, or 3 feet off the ground. I guess it was 1.5 or 2 meters long. The monster appeared in July 2009, observed on several occasions by local witnesses from Treviso and Ponte. It is not an iguana, it is less massive, and we have seen it running, they told the local paper, which noted that many people no longer doubt it. With the summer and the warmth, the strange reptile comes out of its hiding place. A fruit farmer from Ponte had seen it as well in July. He said, "I had parked my tractor above the village on the road into Val Fontana. It looked like a lizard with a long tail. It resembled a kangaroo, but it had scales. Therefore, it must have been a reptile." Zoologist Richard Freeman wrote that it might be an Australian lungfish. Lungfish are a bizarre group of fish. Their air bladders are modified to act as lungs that allow them to gulp air. This is a distinct advantage in times of drought. The South American and African species can also hibernate in periods of hardship. The fish burrows into the mud tunnels, or it builds a cocoon of mud around itself. There are 6 species, 4 of them from Africa, 1 from South America, and 1 from Australia. This sounds almost believable. Lungfish are found in fresh water. We don't know all the types of creatures living in out-of-the-way places. Maybe what people are seeing is some kind of a catfish/lungfish. The stories about how the blood burned people could be just stories, or maybe there's some kind of a creature we know nothing about. I would vote for the last one myself. As recently as 2009, many reports were made in Treviso, area of Italy near the Swiss border. Authorities chalked up most of these to missing monitor lizards that had escaped their masters. Some of the sightings were even said to be raptor dinosaurs. Only the oldest residents of Treviso called the mysterious creature by the name they always knew them as, basilico. Basilico. Yeah, those things. That was the Italian name for the Tatzelwurm. I had mentioned earlier that the basilicus was a legendary creature also known as the Serpent King. The older residents would call the creature by the name that they knew it by. The Tatzelwurm could be any one of a number of creatures that the folks seeing it confused what they saw with what they had heard growing up in the area. A giant salamander seen in a dark location might look like a cat with a snake's body. Add to it a hissing coming from the thing, and I can see how some would mistake the salamander for something else. I doubt all the reports of people seeing some kind of bizarre creature that looks like 2 animals stuck together can be written off that easily. Ulysses Aldrovandi was a well-trained naturalist. He studied a dead body of some unknown creature, and not knowing what it was, he called it a dragon. He had to call it something. You can't just tell your assistant to bring the thing. You might wind up with a plunger. Yes, that's an old Warner Brothers cartoon reference. Sylvester would get stuck somewhere, and his son would yell, "Mother, you'd better bring the thing." The mother cat would appear carrying a plunger. I am not going to wait for modern-day scientists to declare the Tatzelwurm real or not. I can't say for sure they exist. I've never seen one. I've never seen Bigfoot either, but I know a lot of people who have seen him, and I believe they saw a large hair-covered creature that some folks don't believe in. With all the reports of some kind of a half cat, half snake living in the mountains of Europe, you have to wonder. Not so much are the creatures unknown to science, but what are they? I dug and I searched, but this was all I could find about the Tatzelwurm. There just isn't that much out there. Lots of websites that only repeat word for word what everybody else was saying. So, to round out the show, I thought I'd mention another creature that kind of sounds like the Tatzelwurm, the Mongolian deathworm. The Mongolian nomadic tribes call it Algahi korokoi, which translates roughly to intestine worm, due to its resembling the insides of a cow. The worm-like creature with blood-red skin is said to reach up to 5 feet in length. The Mongolian deathworm is believed to possess some distinctly terrifying creatures. The worm can spit corrosive venom or shoot out a powerful shock, electrocuting its victims. Legend had it that these creatures spend most of their time hidden underneath the sandy dunes of the Gobi Desert, but they often surface during the wetter months of June and July. The locals know what to look for when traveling the desert. If they spot anything that looks like a deathworm's lair, mostly a good-sized hole in the ground, usually with the skeletons of the creature's last several meals laying around it, they simply don't go near it. The curious are the ones most at risk. Curious researchers and intrepid adventurers have combed the Gobi Desert in search of this legendary creature. In 1914, zoologist Roy Chapman Andrews was the first Western researcher to take note of the legend. He learned about the elusive sand creature from Mongolian officials before his pioneering expedition to document Mongolian wildlife. He continued searching the Gobi until 1928. Andrews never found the deathworm, but he didn't spend all of his time looking for it. He was looking for all of the animals living in the desert. Czech cryptozoologist Ivan Mackerle, one of the foremost investigators of the mysterious animal, traveled to Mongolia 3 times in search of the worm, 1990, 92, and 2004. Mackerle had first heard of the deathworm as a boy from the works of paleontologist Ivan Yefremov. In college, after meeting a Mongolian student who believed in the worm, Mackerle became obsessed. He combed through Mongolian literature to find more clues about the deathworm and was finally granted permission by the government to conduct research there when he was in his late 40s. Mackerle's expedition team tried different ways to project vibrations underground during their search for the Mongolian deathworm. They had gotten this idea from Frank Herbert's 1965 book, Dune. Mackerle's expedition failed to discover proof of the animal. They did prove most of the modern research material relating to the Mongolian deathworm. A British biologist, Carl Schuker, noted of the legendary creature in The Unexplainable, an illustrated guide to the world's natural and paranormal mysteries. The Mongolian deathworm is believed to possess spike-like projectiles at both ends of its body. Scientists dismiss cryptids like the chupacabra and the yeti as urban legends due to a lack of scientific evidence. Not a lack of evidence, just nothing they are willing to look at. In the scientific community, there's a lot of peer pressure. The boys in the white lab coats are allergic to any kind of ridicule. Any sign that their colleagues might think a scientist is looking into something unusual will cause an immediate brain freeze and an about-face in their research. Just like a cross to a vampire, the phrase, people will laugh at you will stop a scientist in his tracks. If you do want to go looking for a giant worm that just might kill you, you'll need to travel to Mongolia. Once there, you'll need to carry all the equipment you think you might need, like water, and food, and gas for your vehicle, first aid stuff, everything. You're going to places where nobody lives and there are no provisions available. Bring along some bright red material. The locals say the death worm is attracted to red things. Now all you have to do is look for holes in the ground with lots of bones scattered around and try coaxing the killer worm out so you can get a selfie with it. You'll be world famous. Of course, the boys in the white lab coats will say the thing doesn't exist. Only if you bring the death worm back home with you will the scientists be willing to talk to you. Try getting a giant killer worm onto a plane, then trying getting it through customs. Instead of calling them conspiracy theories, we should call them spoiler alerts. I hope you enjoyed tonight's trip into the strange. Tell your friends you don't want to see them ever again if they don't listen as well. Or just tell them to listen to the show. It will give you something to talk about the next time you see them. If you have a story or some interesting subject you'd like to hear on the show, or you have a ghost story, a UFO sighting, or maybe you've seen some kind of a bizarre creature, and you'd like to see it in my next book, you can contact me at strangethings@arkanasa.com. Send me your ideas or send me your stories, and I'll see what I can do with them. If you have a good ghost story or even a bad ghost story, or you saw a UFO, or perhaps your grandfather saw a UFO and told you about it, let me know. Like I said, I'll put it in my next book, which hopefully will be out by the end of the year if I can get enough stories. What with the Black Plague of 2020 still raising its ugly head on occasion, it's a bit difficult to travel around and talk to people and gather stories. Until next Saturday, this is Chris James for Strange Things.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder three. Strange things that happen here, how stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?